Grenadians are set to vote in a referendum next March on a number of constitutional changes, including a recommendation for the country to have the Caribbean Court of Justice as its final appellate court. So far, there seems to be genuine bipartisan support for that particular proposal, and we will have more on that later. But first, other aspects of some of the things Grenadians will be asked to vote on. The critics of the process so far say that the constitutional changes being proposed do not go far enough. Our reporter looks at the referendum debate in St. George's.
Grenada has talked about constitutional reform for years, and twice before it had set up processes to look into that possibility. Many consultations and several studies have been done about how to improve on the constitution that was handed down when the country got independence 40 years ago. But it was only in the last year that the idea picked up institutional steam when this new administration set up a Constitutional Review Commission headed by former Attorney General Dr. Francis Alexis. Dr. Alexis had spearheaded the failed St. Vincent and the Grenadines effort a few years ago. Then, the yes vote being promoted by the government failed after the campaign and the voting went down party lines. Dr. Alexis has expressed confidence that Grenada will succeed where St. Vincent and the Grenadines failed because of some significant differences.
The referendum in St. Vincent and the Grenadines took place not very long after a general election. And the opposition in St. Vincent and the Grenadines was raising certain matters coming out of the election. I'm not saying that they had merit, I'm just saying that they raised them. Indeed, they were almost alleging that the election was not fair and proper. That allegation cannot be made in Grenada because coming out of the last general election, there came into office a political party which was in opposition, and there could have been no question of the opposition, so to speak, interfering with the election. So that cannot arise. Secondly, at the same time, the referendum in St. Vincent and the Grenadines was taking place just about a year before an ensuing election. And the opposition may have felt that if they supported the government and the referendum went through, the government would be able to go straight from the referendum into the general election on a crest of popularity. That too is irrelevant to Grenada.
He also said that the way the items will be presented for voting will be different.
Thirdly, the recommendations going to the government in Grenada are coming out of a broad-based advisory committee. Yes, of course, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they did have a broad-based advisory committee. But this committee in Grenada is holding the fort. We have had no walkouts, no cuss-outs, anything of that kind. And all the recommendations have enjoyed good majority support from the committee. We therefore believe that the ruling party and the main opposition party, respectively the NNP and the NDC, staying the course.
The Grenada Constitutional Review Commission, after months of consultations and its many internal reviews, recently submitted 12 areas that will be brought to a vote, now set for the first quarter of next year. Among them is a recommendation for Grenada to join the Caribbean Court of Justice as its final appellate court. Unlike in some other countries, Grenada needs a full constitutional amendment to do so.
We want to complete our independence, enhance our dignity or self-respect or self-confidence or self-esteem. We want to have a final court which is accessible to the ordinary Grenadian in terms of finance, economics, geography, sociology. Those are some of the factors considered by the committee in voting so overwhelmingly in favor of Grenada acceding to the CCJ appellate jurisdiction.
While the committee was a broad-based committee, including the major opposition party, it was widely expected that there will be a bipartisan vote on the issues presented. But in late August, there came controversy. Opposition Senator and leader of the National Democratic Congress, Nazim Burke, announced that his group will not support next year's vote after complaining that the recommendations should have included other areas. Burke is pushing for a term limit provision as well as proportional representation and fixed date for general elections, among other things.
Having carefully reviewed and considered the contents of the committee's report and its recommendations, we of the NDC feel constrained to state without equivocation that in our view, the proposed amendments to the Constitution leave unattended some of the most important and substantive issues that must be addressed in any constitutional reform. Instead, it focuses somewhat disproportionately on changes which, while proper, will not materially affect the operation of our constitutional democracy.
While Burke has no problems with the 12 areas submitted, he indicated that he will lead the no-vote campaign.
The process adopted and followed by the committee in reaching its conclusions and in making its recommendations to the cabinet fell short of what can reasonably be expected.
He called the pending exercise a waste of time and money.
Sisters and brothers, I am sure you would agree with me that we definitely cannot afford the wanton waste of state resources at a time when resources are so scarce.
But head of the commission, Dr. Alexis, in an interview prior to Burke's declaration, denied suggestions that his committee was not bold enough.
Having an electoral and boundaries commission, that goes to the very meat of our parliamentary democracy, to give people an assurance that the electoral office is going to be properly run. What could be more important than that?
He said that they had decided to move with the areas of broad consensus.
Constitution reform, by its nature, has to be an ongoing thing, an ongoing process. They changed the Constitution completely in Guyana in 1980, and almost every year since then, they have been having numbers of amendments. Trinidad and Tobago changed its constitution in 1976. Right now, as we speak, they are discussing constitution reform. You're not going to fix everything in one referendum. You take some up front and you take others later on.
I don't agree with the view that is work in progress and you start now and you continue. I don't think you want to do a constitutional review every 5 years or every 3 years in an election cycle. I think you want to take some time, re-examine the relevance of the Constitution, see some of the changes that you could make that will last for a pretty long time, and you don't want to do this exercise too regular.
Of course, this is a democratic process, and no person or no sector is going to get all that it wants. It's a democratic process. When we had the voting, the NDC representative, former Prime Minister Tillman Thomas, was very much here, very much participating.
Grenadian trade unionist Chester Humphrey said Burke's reason for a pullout is less than genuine, and that he had decided on that course months before.
Long before the Constitutional Commission, or committee headed by the most celebrated Queen's Counsel, Dr. Alexis, submitted its recommendations, Mr. Burke had already decided that he would vote no. So to come to pretend that his no vote is based on the principle of all or nothing is, as I said, manifestly dishonest. Months ago, Mr. Burke charged that there were, I think, over 10 violations of the Constitution that was currently or in the process or ongoingly violated. Over 10 of them, can't recall all of them that he listed, but one had to do with the decision of the supervisor of elections to resign. And he remarked at that time that you can't expect to have support for constitutional change when you are violating the Constitution. So months ago, Mr. Burke signaled his intention of a no vote campaign.
Burke had replaced Tillman Thomas, the former Prime Minister, as leader of the NDC. Thomas insists that his party has always supported the idea of constitutional reform.
Well, we have always supported constitutional reform, NDC. I mean, NDC is a political party. From time to time, parties, may take different positions, but we have always supported constitutional reform.
I think parties in opposition has to be at the cutting edge of the politics. You can no longer make decisions just on opposing a government, because when you get in office, you have to govern in such a way to be effective for everybody.
Thomas himself said that he would have liked to have seen more of what they called weighty matters put up for the vote.
But as I said, what I would say that I believe the party expected us to go forward with things like proportional representation, fixed date for election.
But he also acknowledged that there are good things within the 12 proposals.
I agree there. I mean, the whole issue of the setting up the committee to deal with the electoral process, a commission instead of a supervisor of election. I think that is important.
Burke's dramatic declaration came on Tuesday, August 18th.
The National Democratic Congress will neither support the proposed constitutional reforms in its present construct, nor the holding of a national referendum for that purpose.
But previous to his announcement, Thomas had warned against the all-or-nothing approach.
No, well, I would advise that whatever is going to be positive for the nation, I would advise that we should go along with it. Whatever is going to improve the democratic process. But again, you see, in politics, politics is something that people look at the situation and see what mileage could be made from a situation. One doesn't know. So I cannot speak for the party on that matter, but I could say I believe, an incremental change in the Constitution, I think is something that we all should go along with.
If you are going after something, and I speak on my practice as a trade unionist for close to 40 years, and you don't get everything that you want, won't you take some of what you want? That's logical.
I learned in life that sometimes you don't get all that you want, and there are things that may happen incremental based on the level that people are, and absolute positions that if you don't get what you want, nothing is not always a correct position. So at the moment, I would not suggest that we go that route, but I will just say I'm disappointed that we have not gone far enough.
So we're not going to solve all the problems at one go, but we make a good start, a very good start, and we are confident that this is a very good start. And once you introduce the concept of constitution reform and the people accept it, next round around, then you can go further into constitution reform.
Thank you very much, Oslin. We've got the Caribbean covered, showcasing stories that matter. This is Carib Update Exclusives.